Hello, and welcome to Sharing Libraries, an LMxAC podcast. I'm Jonathan Upton, Library Catalog and Digital Content Support Specialist at LMxAC. This episode is part of a series featuring guests and topics from across LMxAC. That's the Libraries of Middlesex Automation Consortium for those in the know. I think that if you were playing Family Feud and the topic was Name 5 Things About Libraries, surveys would show the top response is books. Of course, anyone who works at or visits libraries knows that there are a lot more is involved, but that idea, I think, has a powerful hold on us. Today's episode is all about library collections, what we collect, how we circulate, all sorts of fun things. And my guests are Emily Mazzoni, Teen Services Librarian at the Monroe Township Public Library, and Melissa Hozik, Adult Programming Librarian at the East Brunswick Public Library. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So first things first, I guess open to either of you. What's popular and circulating? What have you seen being checked out a lot at your library?
Well, it's interesting that social media and television have been influencing people's book choices for a long time. However, certain social media platforms, such as TikTok, are now reaching younger people, new adults, teenagers, influencing their book choices. So, what we have seen a lot of being checked out lately is authors who have large presence on TikTok and other social media platforms. So we have a lot of people coming in and asking for books by Sarah J. Maas, by Colleen Hoover, by E. Lockhart, Adam Silvera, books that were popular when they came out 10 years ago and are now having a resurgence because of social media influence, which can be really good. I'm happy that people are seeing books promoted in their everyday lives and their internet usage. However, it can be difficult to keep those books, enough copies on the shelf to satisfy our population.
Absolutely. I think it's a brave new world of PR out there. On the one hand, it's wonderful that all of these sort of backlist titles have continued life. It's not, oh, it came out, it's popular for 6 months, it disappears, they all get recycled or whatever. It continues to have this life beyond. But as you say, it can be very difficult to make sure that we're able to meet that demand.
Yes, and it's interesting because a lot of people tend to think that maybe they're the only ones who are learning about these books and they're surprised that there's a holds list that they have to wait to get a book. And so it also it's kind of a good way to inform people yeah, this is really popular. A lot of people are using the library and reading the same titles. So that's kind of fun. It's like a community builder, even though of course what we want really is to have the book on the shelf at all times.
I would agree and I would disagree. I think it's nice to have a full bookshelf that people can come into the library and say, look, there are lots of things that are available for me to check out. At the same time, we want things to be read and we want things to be circulating. So having a nice rotating stock. It's interesting that you mentioned people feeling like surprise when they put a hold on something. Like, what do you mean there's other people who want? Because at least for me, my social media use tends to be almost in a vacuum in that it feels like I'm saying something, I'm tweeting something, I'm posting something on Facebook. A couple people might respond, but it's sort of a one-on-one interaction between me and the one person who responds. It feels less like a broadcast and more like an interpersonal experience. And I think that if people are on TikTok and they see something like, look, I'm having this interaction with this author, and forget that, well, actually, the author's having an interaction with their 600,000 followers. So, yeah, the interest is going to be there. So, awesome.
I've noticed now that we just had award seasons coming through, and that always triggers people to find new things. But we still have a lot of people that go, where's that New York Times bestselling list? Where's that book page? So the traditional ways of finding things are still alive and strong, but it is cool to see book talk and Instagram and people doing lives and authors who have podcasts or go on podcasts and do interview circuits. That's another way of reaching out. And I think it's really cool that authors are having the opportunity as well to reach directly to their readers.
So you can find out about books and other materials, movies, music, all kinds of different things that way. And obviously, patrons can ask, say, do you have this particular thing? Well, we don't have it, but it seems like it's reasonably priced and it looks like we can get it. We'll put in that order for you. So what are some of the ways that library staff decide to buy things, right? We have all this money, we buy things, but how do we make those decisions? Where does that come from? And I'll start with you this time, Melissa.
It comes down to really the media that we consume as library workers. And sometimes someone comes to the desk and like, oh, what would you recommend in this genre? And we have some people who really have those specialties. We're very lucky in that regard.
And Emily, what about your experience? I know you said teen services librarian. Do you have particular areas of interests within that? How do you decide what you're going to get for your library?
I mostly pay attention to review journals, primarily Kirkus. We look for reviews that have been starred by multiple publications. I will read through lots of blurbs and reviews before I make a purchase. I also use my population, my teens. They kind of lead the way. I can see what I've purchased the last 6 months. And when I take those books off of the new shelf, see how many times they've gotten checked out in 6 months, and it kind of gives me a sense of what genres they're reading right now. For example, I have noticed that historical fiction has really fallen off in popularity, and 2 years ago that wasn't the case. And right now I'm seeing a ton of realistic modern fiction, modern romance, and a lot of murder mystery. Murder mystery has made a huge resurgence with my teen population. So I kind of look to them also and then make sure that I'm buying books that will interest them, however, also are peer reviewed and gotten good reviews from other librarians and publishing companies. That being said, it can be difficult. Sometimes it's hit or miss. There have books that I thought sounded great that have completely flopped. I do try to read things off the beaten path because I know the authors that they are going to constantly go for no matter what. So I will try to read a little bit of the less popular things so that after they've read all of Karen McManus's murder mysteries, I can say, okay, well, here's three other things that you might like that are just like her books.
It's been a while since I've ordered any books or other materials. I used to in a previous position. I ordered certain nonfictions. At that particular library, they divided things up. So we used to do a decimal system. So somebody got the 300s, somebody got the 400s. I was responsible, among other things, for the 700s. For those of you who haven't stepped in the library in a while, 700s could be sports, could be arts and entertainment, music, games. So I need like poker, card games, other kinds of games of chance, puzzles, that sort of stuff. Landscape design, which is separate from gardening. So a wide variety of topics is my point. Sometimes you make guesses. My track record in the 700s was probably not the best. I did order a few things that, which, as you say, I thought, oh, this is going to be great. People are going to love this 4-volume set of like landscape design history. I think I was the only one who checked it out. Lesson learned. But I'm curious, our consortium is, as I like to say, sort of a loose confederation. So a lot of the decisions that our consortium members make are up to that library. And in the example that I was mentioning before, where we divided things up by Dewey number, every library staff member had their own sort of area of expertise and speciality. So I'm curious if your libraries are divided up the same way. I know larger libraries might have sort of the acquisitions department or the acquisitions librarian, one person who's responsible for ordering everything.
Everything here is broken out by age group. So YS, they have a sub breakdown with specialties. There's someone who does world languages, and they kind of break down in the way that you recommended. The teen librarian buys all of the YA books with some recommendations. There's someone who buys all the travel books and the standard nonfiction. There's someone who does cookbooks. We get recommendations from our consumer health initiative for the health books. So it really is broken down. And so everyone kind of gets their own specialty, which helps as well. So you're a little bit more niche.
Yeah, our library might not be the biggest, but I think the way we also do nonfiction categories, each librarian has a section, which I think also helps because you get more familiar with what is already on the shelf and you can help fill the gaps that you might see to make sure that you have a diverse, balanced collection. As far as fiction goes, it's sort of a team effort, I think, in the adults as well as children's. I am the solo teen services librarian, so I do purchase and catalog all of my own books, which I love because by the time it gets to the shelf, I've reviewed it, I've double checked when I've ordered it, I've processed it when it come in, and so I already feel like I know the book a little bit before it even gets to my shelf. The interesting thing is when I started here 3 years ago, my director found out that I also read a lot of science fiction fantasy. And I was the one in the building who seemed to know the collection the most. And so I've also taken over ordering the sci-fi fantasy collection for the adults, which I have enjoyed immensely as well.
I'm actually one of the librarians who doesn't have a traditional collection at all. because I'm a programming librarian, but I actually help with some of the non-traditional collections that our library has. So that's kind of a unique, different niche opportunity that library staff have too, to think outside of the box of books and traditional media to figure out what people like.
You have presaged my next question, as a matter of fact, which was, yes, we're talking about books and traditional media, as it were. If you're talking about a makerspace item, you can go to Consumer Reports, for instance, which incidentally, residents of the state of New Jersey can access through their local libraries. They can get Consumer Reports articles and reviews and things. So I want to learn about weed whackers, or I want to learn about voltage meters or whatever. What are some of the things that you need to think about when you're planning out a collection of non-traditional items?
Our makerspace, EB Create, was born from us being heavily involved in New Jersey Makers Day and having librarians who are really hands-on people. And so we've all had different specialties. And our makerspace has a lending kit program where people can check out items for 2 weeks at a time. But we don't have any tools really yet. We want to work on that, but we have confined storage space. So a weed whacker takes up a little too much space for what we have right now. We have more things that are tech. We have things that are also part of STEAM in general, so with arts as well. So we have ukuleles. You can imagine not every family wants to buy a ukulele and all the stuff that goes along with it, and then find out their family member isn't really a fan. So you have the opportunity to take out a ukulele or an acoustic guitar. If you want to start your own podcast, you can take home a home recording studio kit, which you can also plug guitars into and use the iPad to record your music at home. We try to offer programs that are tied into that. And of course, we have Wi-Fi hotspots and things that other libraries really have that are need things, but people may not want to purchase themselves.
One of my great mantras in life is be inspired by, or in other words, steal from the best. So I will often, again, in whether it's professional journals or blog posts or YouTube videos, read about or learn about things that other libraries are doing that I'm like, that I would never have thought of that, but it's so genius. So I mean, thinking specifically of non-traditional items, lending ties, so that people who go to job interviews and don't want to wear the same one tie they have. Or another popular one are baking tins. If you have a kid's birthday and they're huge into robots and you don't want to spend $40 on a one-time use robot baking pan, check out your local library, sort of stuff.
South River has the baking pan collection. It's really neat. And we have patrons who are like, do you know where I could find this and borrow it? And we say, go to South River. And so we try to link them up with librarians there. And that's one of the cool things about a consortium, that we try to share our resources together to offer things that maybe we haven't thought of before.
Absolutely. So one of the benefits, as you say, of being a consortium is that you can borrow things throughout from one member library to another. In many cases, you can be in the comfort of your own home, request it online, and have it sent to your home library. You don't need to drive all the way from up in Union County down to South River or wherever. Yeah, they'll send it to you in many cases. As I mentioned earlier, a loose confederation of libraries. So each library sort of gets to set their own rules. I know sending a book through the courier is one thing. Sending a weed whacker, if you'll pardon the extended reliance on that particular metaphor, or some other thing, libraries might not be as willing to loan out either pricier items or items that have way too many parts.
Or things that break, like iPads, that if you put a 40-pound box of books on top of it, might not make it through. So, yeah, there's some things that we don't lend. Maybe that will change someday, but a lot of not the traditional things. We'll make sure that they get to you and they're not broken or damaged.
Yeah, obviously we want you to have a good experience with it, whatever it is, whether it's the latest bestseller or a piece of equipment. In any event, what you can always do is ask your local library or call across the consortium and say, hey, look, I've noticed that you have this item. What are the rules around that? Can I borrow it? Do I need to show up in person? Do I need to pay anything? All sorts of different questions. We're always happy to answer questions. As people who work in libraries, questions are sort of what we do. So we've talked about a variety of different things, but let's say we've identified either books or technology or baking equipment, I mean, whatever the case may be. Look, we've purchased it, it's come into the library. What needs to happen before we don't just pick the item out of the box, put it up on the shelf, be like, oh, we're good to go. There's a lot of work involved on behalf of library staff that needs to make that happen. I know, Emily, you mentioned you, in addition to purchasing, you're also doing cataloging. What is that process sort of like?
That process looks like opening the box of books, which I will say I've been a librarian for 10 years. It does not get old. It's always fun to open a box of brand new books. So that looks like going through deciding, in my case, my section is a little bit genrefied. So my young adult section is separated into, I have a fantasy room, I have a wall of mystery, I have a science fiction section, and then I have a realistic and historical fiction collection. So everything is kind of separated, which is really helpful for helping students find a type of book, even when they might not know exactly what they're looking for. So I have to decide, do I want to put this in fiction? Is it more of a murder mystery? So I decide on a genre. I also have to decide then cataloging sticker for the spine, meaning it's going to say YA, it's going to say either fiction, fantasy, mystery, etc. It's going to have the author's name. So everything gets stickered, everything gets barcoded, everything gets uploaded into the catalog. So it's searchable and check outable. And then here in Monroe, it also has to get RFID tagged, which means that everything gets a metal sticker in the back of the book, because we have new self-checkout stations where you can put a whole stack of books and they'll all check out by RFID tag. It's a little bit of a process, but like I said, I enjoy it because by the time that's all done, I've had my hands on the book a few times, and now I've come to really understand what's going into my collection.
East Brunswick also has the RFID tagging, which when a kid comes out with a huge stack of books, we're like, you don't have to scan them. This is how they work. And they think it's magic. But it also makes it really helpful for us to be able to track what we have, what we don't, know where it is. And actually, one of the collections that I have is our seed library, and it does not come processed. It comes in a gigantic packet that we sort out, and we have curated collections of 5 different types of seeds that are around a theme. This year, one of them was native pollinators. So the packages come in. I go through, make little envelopes, make sure that everyone gets the back of the seed packet because the instructions are there. So that important information. And that's actually one of the collections that doesn't come back in the same way. We try to encourage people to save seeds through the collection and return to it to make it sustainable. We tie in programming with the Middlesex County Master Gardeners. They help people learn how to do that.
Melissa, that is really, really cool.
And some other libraries, I think Red Bank has one. So there's a lot of opportunities. So if you're into gardening, check that out. And then also go into those sections on landscape design and gardening that Jonathan was mentioning. And then you can be more successful for those of us who are black thumbs at best.
The gardening is 635 in Dewey. I think landscape design is 712 or 715. It's just going to bug me. In library school, my reference class instructor was the head of reference for one of the 2 local libraries. So he's an experienced professional who you could tell him anything and he knew the Dewey number for it because he'd been doing it for so long. It was very impressive. And I will say, apropos of that, the job that I had in the library that taught me most about a collection was actually being a page. In high school, I was a page for 3 years. I put shelves in the books like 3 times a week. And I learned the Dewey Decimal System, and I learned what that library had and where everything was better than any other job I've ever had in the library, because I spent so much time. As you say, you're watching the life cycle of this collection, or in my case, I'm watching the life cycle of it going back on the shelf. And also, of course, seeing what gets checked out and returned a lot. So it gives you eyes on what things are popular, which obviously you can see at the circulation desk as well.
So, as an aside to that, as a teen services librarian, a little secret is that I often know more the Dewey Decimal System based on location in the library as opposed to the number.
That's completely same for me too. You just kind of learn to gravitate towards where things are.
I absolutely do that too. Anytime I've spent any time in a library, but I noticed that my fingers also, of course, my phone these days, my phone remembers numbers for me. But before we had phones that remembered everything and you saw it on the screen, when I had to type in numbers, I would type in numbers and my brain would not be involved in remembering the number. My fingers would know the pattern. Libraries and library staff are trying to be helpful. So in most libraries I've worked in, they'll also put a sign up saying, hey, are you looking for these general topics? The best example of that I've ever seen, one of the libraries I worked at, and several libraries I've seen post online, in the teen areas, and I think also in adult, but especially the teen areas, we're putting up, here are some topics you might be too embarrassed to ask about. But if you're looking for information about this health issue, or what's going on if my parents are getting divorced, I don't want to have to ask the librarian about that, but I want to know something. Where can I find that information? And just putting that out there in a place where they think teens are going to find it can be very helpful and beneficial.
I agree. I love having shelf talkers. on the shelves that are labeled and end cap signs to point people. And I actually really appreciate that the adult nonfiction collection is, of course, way larger than my young adult nonfiction collection. However, I can show them here are the numbers, and then they can go on the other side and go more into depth research on their own without having to have someone guide them to the shelf.
We also have a very diverse community, and some people do not approach people and ask questions. That's not something in their regular practice. So we always try to make it accessible without having to ask someone. But there's also over time figuring out what that is for your community. And the only way we really know is to interact with them and watch how they walk up to a collection. So shelf talkers and things like that are really great. And it inspires them to go on to something else and learn a little bit more.
I do have two final questions, or one question and a catch-all. But before I do, I've had a note that I wanted to mention. That's actually a perfect time to mention it. One of the resources that is available to library patrons is called Novelist. Is a service where you can research fiction, mysteries, Western, sci-fi. But you go in and you can say, look, I've read the following authors or titles or whatever, or I'm looking for certain things. Why do you like reading this particular book? I like it because it's fast-paced. I like it because it's this gritty, realistic take. I like it because it's fantasy, or I like it because it has a strong female protagonist. And the company behind Novelist has gone through and looked at all these sorts of popular and less popular and wide array of books and identified all of these appeal factors. And you can say, look, I read the following books and I want to read more of that sort of genre or that type or things that have the same elements. And Novelists can help you do that. And you can do it, again, from the comfort of your own home, anywhere you can access the internet. I will also point out that we have very trained and helpful library workers who will also be able and more than happy to do the same thing for you in person on the phone, who can guide you to amazing things you never thought you would have considered before, whether they be books, music, movies, sheet pans, or guitars. With that said, do either of you have a display that you've made recently that you're particularly proud of or happy with? Or are you completely against displays?
We are very display heavy here at the library at East Brunswick. We have a health and wellness display that is always up that people can access in the front. So everything rotates. Every department does things a little bit differently because their space is different, but displays are still really important. And maybe they can be virtual as well. Maybe people have bookmarks that you can go to a page and find those things. Or I know on the front of the catalog that different libraries can put those lists as well. So if you go to the catalog and you're logging in, like, oh, they have this new mystery list. Let me click on it and then are inspired to do it that way as well. So there's different ways to display media.
In young adult, it's a little bit different because I try to allow my teen volunteers to help create the displays. Some of my kids are really big readers. So I will have traditional displays like Hispanic Heritage Month. We do a display of Latinx authors. I also have one up right now that's called Famous and Fabulous because one of my teens wanted to kind of do books on people who are in bands or so we kind of mix it up. I also do a lot of little posters. You love Harry Potter, try these. You love Percy Jackson, try these. So we kind of try to do that. Also, I have a Love Books by Colleen Hoover display that I have to keep coming up with new titles to fill it in because they get checked out a lot. And it's really nice to get things moving from the collection that might otherwise not go. When I recommend books to teens or do a display, I try to purposefully pull from the bottom shelf. So the books that might just not get noticed as much.
Also, we have some really great teen volunteers as well. And they've been taking over Instagram because we have a teen account. And they're putting, oh, well, today's date is this. We recommend this. And they put a QR code, which we're seeing come back. There was a period where people were using it and then it kind of went away. And now it's back. It's a way that you can take your camera phone. And now all the camera phones do this. You don't have to download a separate app. They can go up, open their phone, link it, pull it right up. We also use that for downloading the LMxPress Plus app for the catalog. Having teens that are amazing too help inspire that, or having those community members who are those super users be like, oh, you should have this, and then asking for their feedback on it. So it highlights them as well
Yeah.
and things we may not think of because sometimes we're a
Right.
little bit more focused than they
Yeah.
are.
And especially with things like Instagram, like some of that stuff does take up a lot of time. It's staff time to create those posts. So if I can give them volunteer service hours and have them feel like they're a part of something, I love when they create digital content for me. Yeah, so it's fun to involve them and find out more about what they've been reading, what they like. That's always helpful for me as a librarian.
Awesome. I'm always amazed at the things I hear coming out of teen departments. That kind of engagement of teen generated displays. I'm like, it's just blowing my mind, to be perfectly honest. I think that's awesome. My last question was simply, was there anything else that you definitely wanted to get out and say, we have awesome collections and you should totally check them out, or anything else?
Well, we all have awesome collections. Wouldn't you
Well,
say? We're
well,
also all very biased.
well, granted, yes. I mean, hey, look, that's the plus. Everyone can have their own awesome collection, and consortium members can partake of so much of it, and can take advantage of the expertise of the librarian at Plainsboro, who is a huge punk rock fan and collects punk rock CDs. Or I worked at libraries that have phenomenal cookbook collections. And so when I'm planning Thanksgiving dinners, there is a specific library now that I go to because I know that librarian has done an amazing job curating a cookbook collection. So I know I will find something good there. Anyway, so yeah, no, we absolutely do all have amazing collections. I didn't mean to suggest otherwise.
I would say that East Brunswick has a really good cookbook collection, and I'm biased. I love to cook. We also have a lot of musicians here at our library, and so our CD collection, which everyone's like, no one uses CDs anymore. No, they do. And if we don't have it, Hoopla Digital has it, and then you can take it along with you because a lot of cars don't have CD players anymore. So I think we have cooking and music, and they actually go together. I listened to some of the playlists that we've also shared. So if anyone wants to find out our specialties, visit ebpl.org.
Yeah, I think it's so wonderful how our libraries are a little bit different, and that's the beauty of a library is that it's unique to your community. So there might be like different books in other languages that might be held at one library more than some of the other ones, and just the amount that's available to you as an LMX patron is so much bigger than what's just on in your library. So I just think it's really awesome that we can all work together and deliver these things to our patrons all across the county.
Thank you both very much. My guests today have been Melissa Hozik, Adult Programming Librarian at the East Brunswick Public Library, and Emily Mazzoni, Teen Services Librarian at Monroe Township Public Library. I'm Jonathan Upton, Library Catalog and Digital Content Support Specialist at LMxAC. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you for having me.
For more information about the libraries and collections mentioned today, as well as all of the members in our consortium, visit lmxac.org. Additional podcast episodes can be found at ebpl.org/podcast.